Think you know the truth about breast implants? Well, think again. In today's episode, we're busting the big myths from whether they're safe to whether they really need replacing every 10 years. Stick around. What you don't know might surprise you and could keep you from looking and feeling your best.
Welcome to The Doc Dudes, your premier podcast for a behind-the-scenes look at the latest in aesthetic medicine. Hosted by the cosmetic surgeons at Graper Harper Cosmetic Surgery in Charlotte, North Carolina, The Doc Dudes brings you interviews with insightful guests, expert tips from experienced medical professionals, and lots of laughs along the way. And now, here's Dr. Garrett Harper, Dr. Robert Graper, and Dr. Evan Zug, also known as The Doc Dudes.
Welcome to another episode of The Doc Dudes. Today's title is What You're Getting Wrong About Breast Implants. Man, we are going to take a deep dive. We're going to talk about all things breast implants. I am Dr. Garrett Harper, and I am joined today by Dr.
Robert Graper
and Evan Zug.
Yeah, all board-certified plastic surgeons, and so we are going to jump right into breast implants. We'll go over some of the myths, all that kind of stuff. I feel like every podcast we've ever recorded, sans maybe the facelift ones, we've talked about breast implants. So this is kind of a good opportunity to learn more about them. So I'm going to have Dr. Graper go over the history of breast implants. You don't need to go too crazy, but just talk about.
You want to put people to sleep right
don't
away?
Go wild, but I mean, let's just talk about how these things started in Houston and what's happened, where we've been through it. Talk a little bit about what happened, at the turn of the century with gels and how they were taken off the market, and we were the only country that did that, and there was really no reason to do it, but we did. Yeah. So talk about all that.
Well, what I remember is in Houston in 1962, for some reason, Thomas Cronin, who had done a fair amount of cleft lip and palate, all of a sudden was interested in breast implants as well, and they would put Ivolon sponges in the breast.
Crazy.
And then somehow they got from these volume additional sponges to a bag of silicone,
right.
But at the same time they were developing bags of saline,
right.
Probably because somebody thought, well, silicone's a foreign body and saline's just salt water.
And saline's just salt water, so from an osmotic standpoint, it'll stay in the bag better than pure water would, but yeah.
And that's the first generation of implants, and then they quickly moved to the second generation where they're trying to make them softer and lighter, and so they underfilled the implants, and they were very, very soft. But the problem was it's like an underfilled baggie, and when that baggie moved and it was underfilled, there were fold faults, just like you'd fold a piece of paper to try to cut out a coupon, and that's what happened. There were faults in the silicone, and the silicone would leak out.
Yeah, it'd rupture.
And the media went berserk about faulty implants and that they knew that they would leak, and it turns out they did know that they would leak. So they succeeded in making a really soft implant, but it wasn't a very durable implant.
Right.
So then they had the implant crisis, as the people in plastic surgery know it, and there was a lot of money spent in lawsuits, but then came along the third generation of implants, which were more filled, so they were firmer, and the shells were thicker, so they were firmer. Right. But they would still leak if they had a trauma tomb or a manufacturing defect. The silicone was still liquid and it would leak out. And then came the fourth generation of implants, which were called gummy bear cohesive implants, that were shaped, and they had to be textured, because if they weren't textured, if you wanted a shape where the lower pole was fuller than the upper pole, then you had to texture them just so that the implant didn't rotate in the pocket.
It can't move.
And what happened was it rotated anyway, and you couldn't tell the difference. And so people went, why are we spending all this time with that? And then the texturing developed this phenomena called ALCL, which is a rare form of very curable lymphoma. And we got away from that. So we're into was that the fifth or sixth generation of implants that are cohesive. So if you cut them, none of the silicone comes out, so they're very safe. They've got the shells thinner because you don't need a thick shell if you got a cohesive fill. and they're not textured, so that if they rotate in the pocket, it doesn't matter. And that's where we are.
Right. And also, along with kind of the evolution of the device itself, there was an evolution in placement of devices, right? And kind of
Exactly.
where you put it. So, I think people used to look at, okay, well, we're augmenting the breast, and the breast sits in front of the pectoralis, major muscle, pectoralis, minor muscles, serratus muscles, all that on the chest wall. But it is not underneath the muscle, the big muscle in your chest. And so in an effort to kind of disguise some of the rippling that you would get with the older devices, try to minimize the unwanted, overzealous scar tissue, which is called capsular contracture. They started placing the devices below the muscle. And you really found when we only had saline devices, those did really bad above the muscle and did really bad. So a whole generation of plastic surgeons for 5 to 10 years were basically learning only how to put, saline devices underneath the muscle. So when the gel devices, when the textured shape devices came out, you'd had plastic surgeons putting them in that location for the last 15 years. I mean, out of necessity, out of really kind of effort not to have any complications and problems, which just brings you back to the OR. And
Well, some of it was just habit. They were used to putting them under the muscle.
Right.
And now they had a device that didn't need to be under the muscle.
Right, the texture device. The shape texture device was not meant to go underneath the muscle. I mean, these devices were meant to supplement the breast tissue plane, the breast tissue area, but they were put underneath that location. And so I think now that we've gotten away, most people have gotten away from the texture devices. We're back to the smooth wall devices, but they've put that same gummy bear gel implant material inside a round device. So you don't need it textured. So you don't have to worry about the ALCL that you were talking about. These things can rotate inside the pocket, and it doesn't look like you got a sideways boob or anything like that because there's no top and bottom to this, right? They're consistent throughout their height and width. And so we now have over the last, because there were 3 implant companies that the United States allowed implants to be made from. There was Mentor, that's been around for forever. There's Allergan Natrel implant, which is basically an offshoot of the older McGann implants, been around for forever. There were Sientra implants, which were introduced probably 2010, 2011, somewhere in there.
They were an offshoot of Silamed.
Right. And each had its own kind of patents and all that kind of stuff. But, you'd have people in any town and some plastic surgery practices that would use all 3. I mean, if you really felt compelled that one was so much better than the other, so much safer, yada, yada, I think obviously we would all use the exact same implant. So I think there's debate on which is the better implant of those 3. But recently, we got a 4th one now. So Evan, what's the newest implant that's come out, and we're all in the United States still kind of learning about it? It's been in other countries for decades and has tons of research, but obviously the FDA, because of that implant crisis that you talked about 20-something years ago, really hard to get a device into our market. So when you do get a device into the market, by God, it's been studied and it's been safe. But talk a little bit about the Motiva device and how it's different than the other ones.
Yeah, so these new Motiva implants, were recently FDA approved, and that's a really difficult process, like you were saying. But now they are approved. They've been in use in multiple other countries in the U.S. and South America, and are really well liked there. And these implants, I think, are a little bit different. I have not used them on a patient yet, so we're excited about that opportunity. But I think, when I feel these implants, they do feel softer and more natural feeling. And I think that is because of several reasons. I think maybe their silicone is a little bit different. Their gel is a little bit different. Maybe it's more cohesive, but it's not as firm as a more highly cohesive implant. It's softer.
Right. So that's
And-
when you're working on this thing in like physics is called the G prime, right?
Yep.
And they do the same thing with fillers, right? With like Juvederm's product line that we use a ton of, they will have different thicknesses and consistencies to it. So they'll change that. And the idea, Dr. Graper's talked about it in other podcasts, and I think you have too, Evan, is you want a soft device that maintains its form. So that's the crux of the whole thing. So keep going. Sorry.
Yeah. And I think the other thing that makes them different is their shell to gel interface is more of one. It's more of a one device rather than there you have your shell and then the gel on the inside. Like you can't separate the shell from the gel if you kind of run your fingers.
It's not like filling a bag.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's not
And
like a water balloon and then all of a sudden you're filling it with a compound and it's more intimate between the shell and
So you think in making them, they have this glob of, I'm sorry to just wondering how they do that, whether they've got this glob of implant material and then they sort of treat the external surface with heat or
I don't think
curing
I don't think it's like charring a bourbon barrel or anything like that. I do think that they're separate components, but I do think that there's a process that's done that changes that. Mentor says the same thing, right? Mentor says that their gel to shell interface, which is what they call, has X, Y, and Z as their kind of advantages.
And it may be just
over
they're
some
more
other ones.
filled. They're
Right.
filled more.
Yeah.
And that may be the reason.
You think the
Well, I
shell
think
is
there's
a
actually
different-
less sliding. Like they will look at like friction coefficients and things like that. And I mean, the data is neat, but Dr. Graper, you and I have talked about for, a decade together in practice. It's like sometimes people invent new things to solve problems that aren't out there. You know what I mean? Like why go there? Where does it really make a difference? And if I'm choosing the right implant and choosing the right plane and, making the right decisions for the patients, does that coefficient of whatever really matter? And that's what we have to see, because there's stuff that's in a laboratory makes sense, and then there's stuff that like in the human body makes sense.
Yeah,
right?
patients want an implant that's not going to ripple.
Right.
It's gonna have a good longevity, so
Yep.
you're not going to develop capsular contracture, and
Yep.
it's something that looks and feels natural.
Right. And so
That's what they want.
So let that jump us right into what are our strategies as a practice? What should all plastic surgeons' strategies be to minimize complications from an implant? And so, there's debate from my standpoint. I'll take this portion of it. The debate between putting implants above or below the muscle, right? And I think that because the complication rates are so low now with all of capsular contractures, infections, rippling, those types of things, I just think that, like I have seen in my practice, 5 years ago, 95% of all my implants would have been underneath the muscle. And now 95% are above the muscle. And I think that there are some patients that will do better with the device below their muscle. But I think that the muscle in a large majority of patients can give you a less natural result. And so I especially think that's the case with these newer devices, this new generation of devices that are overfilled gels that may or may not have this new kind of gel shell interface, but maintain their upper pole fullness when you're standing upright, because no longer is it that honey molasses consistency that goes to the bottom of the bag. Because at that point, the gel and the shell were two separate components. And so it would come all the way to the bottom and you'd lose that volume in your upper pole. Certainly if you're bending over or picking something up or anything like that, you're going to see a major loss in volume in those areas. And the newer devices don't do that. The Motiva device, I think what's neat from what their salesmanship is right now is they talk about making an effort from a physics standpoint of like trying to have the least reaction that the human body will have to the outer shell. And they found that that's with this 4 nanometer kind of micro silk texturing that they have. Because when you fill the device, it's not smooth. It's not the rough texture that needed to be to really hold a shaped device in play. Because of the 3 devices that were textured, the Allergan texturing was the strongest, was the most aggressive, but also had the least malrotation, right? So it's one of these things where,
And they say their implants aren't textured, but technically they are textured. They're just defining texture differently.
right,
But they also have never had a case of ALCL
right,
with those implants.
100%.
So I think
Do they have a long enough history to know?
They do in other countries. But I mean, in ours, right, the FDA wants us to give them American data. So they're working on 4 or 5 years of data right now instead of 15, 20 years like they have in other countries. But so from a placement standpoint, right, when we talked about our strategies of trying to minimize complications, I think there's, if you are choosing the right device in a patient, not just putting some huge device in a small chest, which is going to be fraught with complications no matter where you put it. I personally think that like an above the muscle position is a really safe, beautiful place to place an implant. What are some other things that we're doing to try to minimize complications in patients? And I mean like incision site, antibiotics, funnels, those types of things.
Well, so
Nipple shields.
In my career, it's been a long time, and we put incisions under the breast, around the nipple, under the armpit. We put them mostly under the muscle because we thought that scar tissue that made a firm breast was better. It was less likely to happen under the muscle, and the data didn't support really anything conclusively until they were able to not even culture, DNA sequence bacteria out of the fluid around the implant. And that told us that there were bacteria causing the capsular contracture, even though they didn't grow because they were too fastidious. And that was despite us irrigating the pocket with triple antibiotic solution and betadine, because there was an implant in there and the bacteria could live on the implant. So what changed my practice from maybe 15 or 20% capsular contracture rate to almost none was putting an opsite bandage over the nipple, which I think now is fairly standard.
Yeah. Nipple shields.
Nipple shields that prevent the bacteria from getting onto the operative field, and then putting the implant into the incision with a funnel so the implant never touches the skin, which, now retrospectively seems like a duh moment.
Right.
But that, and doing everything else the same, has taken that capsular contracture rate to...
But I remember all those things, right? Like not only the nipple shield, I remember when we would put those tegaderms, right? Those same op-site dressings over their inframammary fold incision. Mm-hmm. You'd put, and then you'd cut through that.
But it never...
Right. Or you had
gapped.
sealants. I mean, I don't know if you remember, there were like little sealants that you would put over the skin that would, and you're like, why not just not have the implant touch the skin on its way in? Not force it to go through the nipple areolar complex, not force it to go through the armpit where there's sweat glands, ducts, bacteria, all these types of things. And so we know that betadine is as good as antibiotic solution now. Perioperative antibiotics is one of these things. It's like, I don't know that the data's out there that we necessarily need to, but we do.
Yeah, we do.
We're going to give you perioperative antibiotics. We're going to typically use an inframammary fold incision. We're going to use a device that's the right size and the right shape for your body anatomically, and discuss with you what should be an option for you and what shouldn't be an option for you. Use the nipple shields, use the betadine solution, use the funnel, all these different points that really go into minimizing the problems. So let's talk a little bit about myths and what are the true facts about implants. So I'm just going to kind of go off the hip on these. Dr. Zug, do breast implants need to be replaced every 10 years?
No, not at all. Depends on the implant. I mean, patients can have implants for up to 30 years. I mean, I think patients hear that because I think plastic surgeons may want to have another operation out of them.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But I don't think it's necessary at all.
I know when they used to do the data, right, it was kind of analogous to the way I looked at how people used to say that you were a high-risk pregnancy if you were 35 years old and you're pregnant, right? Because they looked at, when they used to do amniocentesis, they used to look at like, well, what's the rate of a complication, a fetal death, a problem from the procedure of an amniocentesis, where they would be sticking a needle inside the uterus, withdrawing fluid to see if a baby was Down syndrome, right? And so that was 1 in 200. And then they looked at the age of 35, what percentage of those patients have have a Down syndrome child? And it was 1 in 200. So it was where those inflection points crossed, and they just magically came up. But like, you have a 99.5% chance of not having a problem. I mean, it's pretty good odds, right? Mm-hmm. So similarly, I know that they looked at it historically and they said, well, at what time do 25% of breast implant patients require a second surgery or have a second surgery, right? Because this is elective, so it's not totally fair to do that. And that was around the 10-year mark. These are older devices. These were devices that were placed through any number of incisions. These were salines, gels, combination of all of those. We know gels last longer than salines. And it was all comers. And so,
I mean, it wasn't just an implant problem; it was a position problem or a scar problem.
right. But also think if the average age of an augmentation is 23, 24 years old, what happens to a woman from age 23 to 33? Right, pregnancies, weight changes, gains. I mean, you go, snow skiing and yard sail that thing out, land right on this saline implant, it pops. It's not the implant's fault, right? So like I tell patients, if we make all the right decisions and you take care of them, right? You Tom Hanks castaway it and don't wear a bra for the rest of your life.
But it's still not an implant problem. That's a soft tissue problem.
I agree. But I'm just saying you may have another surgery, right?
Surgery versus
But there's
surgery
no
for an
shelf
implant
life.
problem is a different
Right.
question than surgery because you have a malposition or you want to be bigger or
Right.
you want to be smaller or
There's
you want to
no
lift.
shelf life or half-life on these implants. I tell people, we do this right, and I'm 47 years old.
And your goals remain the same.
Right. We're going to be fist bumping each other in the old folks home, right? You take these things all the way there. You'll have all the hot sauces, all the yellow cake you can eat, right?
What is the most common reason, Dr. Zug, Dr. Harper, for reoperation in breast augmentation in the first 10 years?
Oh, that's a good question.
I can tell you my answer. They want to be bigger.
Change in size.
Yeah. They thought they wanted one thing and now the reality's hit them and they go, oh, you know what?
Yep.
I love them, but I think they could be a little bigger.
So the data used to be pretty easy to remember. When you've augmented a patient, 85% of patients are happy with their size. 15% wish they had a different size. And of those 15%, 85% of those 15% wish they went bigger, 15 went smaller. But I think that what's critical, right, to make sure that you size correctly and do that is having the patient show you what they want to look like. And I don't like before and afters because you're going to read below, oh, this patient got a ultra high implant from Mexico or whatever. It's like, I don't want you to read. I just want to know what you think is beautiful. And then it's my job to try to create that. It's an art project back there to try to make it as close to that as humanly possible. And so I ask for pictures.
So somebody comes in and they're an A cup, and they bring in this picture of a double D.
That's not going to happen.
Okay. So, in the past, people come in and say, what do you want to be? And okay, we'll try to make you that. They never come in and say, I want to be, well, occasionally they do say, I just want to be as pretty as I can be, and I don't really care what size it is. If you were trying to make that breast, how would you do it in terms of percentage of the final breast that was implant versus natural tissue?
I don't know of a percentage. I know of a look and I know of a feel, and I know those things are all super important. I think where I would answer this question is I would tell you, I'm a biodimensional guy. So I believe in the golden rule of psi. I believe in all the golden ratios and all those things that are beautiful, right? So I look at a breast and I know that I'm going to measure their base width, which is the width of their breast kind of foundation. And I know that I'm going to stay within a half a centimeter of that, depending upon if they need more or less shape out lateral, like the side boob that looks so beautiful, right? I also know that I'm going to want, from that base width, I want their nipple to fold distance to be 3.5 centimeters less than that. And so I can measure all these things and make adjustments to this, but that's going to ensure that I've got a good ratio of volume above and below the nipple. And I think that's where you start looking at the shape, not necessarily because, if you're an A cup, if you're nipple on skin, you don't have any of your own breast tissue. I mean, we can still make a gorgeous breast and you may be 90% implant at that point. But I mean, the perfect best is somebody who's just got a perfect natural breast. But that's not who's coming in for an augmentation typically.
Yeah, so I would answer that question, and correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Zug, that, if you've got a pretty natural breast that's 100% breast, that's gorgeous, a C cup, you're not even coming in.
Right.
Now, you say, I want to be a C cup and you're an A cup, and your final breast volume is 90% implant.
Right.
Guess what? It's going to look and feel like an implant because
100%.
it is an implant.
That's right.
So I'm wondering if that ratio of natural tissue to implant is in the 50% range or maybe 75% range. Certainly the less you get, the more natural it feels and looks.
Right.
But you may or may not be able to get your size goals if you do that. So you got to balance their anatomy, their goals with naturalness and how important that is. Some people come in and say, I just want big. They're really round and look fake. That's fine with me. I like that. And you got to kind of, so y'all talk about that. Tell me what you think.
I've never really thought of it like that, the percentage of breast to implant, but it makes a lot of sense and something that, I use a lot of different things to decide what type of implant to use for a patient and what size, and based off, I basically what I tell them is I want to have a breast for you that fits your body frame and it's youthful and pretty.
Yeah.
And then we go into more detail from there, but use all the different measurements to determine what's the best implant for that patient. And I think most importantly is what the patient wants and what they think is pretty. But yeah, the more implant to less breast tissue ratio, you're probably not going to be as happy with that. It's probably not going to.
Just depends on your goals. Right?
Yeah, it just depends what you want.
So Garrett is a biodimensional guy, and that makes a lot of sense to me. But we weren't trained that way. We were trained just pure volume.
Yeah.
And what size do you want to be? And the bigger it is, the faker it is.
Yeah.
But it did depend on their thorax size, their current breast size, where the nipple was.
Yeah. But the implants come in so many different shapes. Sometimes I tell people, and this blows their mind. It blows surgeons' minds sometimes when I'm teaching them I can make your breast look smaller, right? If you've got implants right now, I sometimes can make you look smaller with a larger volume implant. Because it's not the volume, it's how the volume is distributed within the implant. And from your ratio standpoint that you're talking about, I can send countless breast reconstructions to you, women that I've reconstructed over the last 10 years that went from having 100% natural breast to a 95% implant breast, and their results will knock you off your socks. They have a much prettier breast.
Yes, you're pretty talented, though.
Well, thank you. But I do think that, the look, the shape of the breast, all those things are always the most critical. And there was a great breast surgeon in France that I trained under, Nathalie Bricou, and she also used to, when she was talking about incisions and if you need to add lifts and things like that to it, she always said, because everybody wants to minimize their incisions, right? And she would always say, never sacrifice shape for incision length, right? Like the most important thing that patient wants, the thing that they're going to hang their hat on for the rest of their life is, how does my breast look? And feels right up there with it. I get it, but they want to look beautiful and not just in clothes. They want to look great naked. And that's what we want them to feel like. And that's where we really can, affect their confidence and affect their way of life. So, all right, that's the 10 years thing. Do implants always look unnatural and fake? Dr. Graper.
I'd say, for my eye, I think breasts are pretty. We really care about them in America. And for me, is that implant becomes more round and firm and high. To me, that's a dead giveaway, especially if you got a really thin woman. There are very few very thin women who have naturally large breasts. They're out there, but they're not very many of them. So most of the time in society, if you see a round, high implant that's not in a push-up bra, because that distorts everything and changes it. No. So, implants can look very fake or they can look super natural, and just depends on the setting and the volumes and all that.
Absolutely. All right, Evan. So do implants interfere with your ability to breastfeed?
Not usually.
Okay. So certainly staying away from the nipple-areolar complex, incision and all those types of things. Theoretically, either dissection above or below the muscle is away from the ducts and glands. So shouldn't. I'm going to take the next question that's basically breast implants. they get in the way of your mammograms. No, I literally wrote a book chapter on this, and Kirby Bland, who was the surgical oncologist at UAB for forever.
He was at UAB.
He had a book entitled The Breast, and I was assigned this. And so the short answer is no. I mean, you're not in a third world country. You're going to a mammography center that will, they'll have you sign away your waivers so that they don't pop and rupture your implant, which they just have to do to cover their tail. But no, they use a series of Eklund techniques, which is the guy who kind of invented how they can displace the implant. They will get almost identical visualization of your breast tissue as if you'd never had implants, both above and below the muscle. There's no change in those. All right. Dr. Graper, can breast implants cause breast cancer?
Short answer is no. This ALCL thing is
not a breast cancer.
It's not a breast cancer,
right?
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's right.
Yeah. So do breast implants always feel hard and unnatural, Evan?
I mean, if they're too big for you, then potentially if there's capsular contracture, they can feel hard.
So not if they're done right.
But not always.
Not if they're done right and you're not having problems, right? They can look amazing. Yeah. Right. And feel amazing. All right. And Dr. Graper, breast implants, are they only for young women?
I hope not.
Define young woman, right?
Yeah.
No, breast implants are for everybody, right? Make the whole world happy with breast implants. Okay, so we've talked about saline silicone, which is safer. You can exercise after breast implants. I do think that's one advantage of going above the muscle, is that every time you're engaging your pec muscle, it's not making your breast jump or anything crazy like that. But exercise away, lay on your chest, get massages, do all those types of things, which are amazing. So, the complication rates, all of the problems that used to happen with breast implants are really by the wayside now. These are so amazing. I keep wondering, how are we going to get a better breast implant? And ultimately, they'll keep perfecting the technology. They'll keep working on that. How soft can I get and it still hold its shape? What can we do to the shell to try to have as little reaction as possible to the human body? How can we implant this thing with an antibiotic or something that makes sure we don't get that nidus of bacteria that can increase capsular contracture? But again, we've talked about it countless times. It's like everybody's trying to invent all these new things to solve problems that are minimal.
Especially it's so interesting to learn about the history of breast implants, because I don't see those things anymore.
Right.
And y'all have seen them.
Oh yeah.
I was trained to put them under the muscle, but I think it's better to put them above the muscle.
Right.
And all these complications that y'all have seen and we learn about, it really helps patients who are unsteady or uneasy about wanting to have an implant.
Right.
It really puts that aside because they realize how much better things have gotten with the implant and the surgical technique.
I think once they're educated on the safety, this idea of I've heard implants are bad, there really is that kind of concept out there. And I think it's important for all of us to, because that's not what you get in the media, right? In the media, you get the former supermodel that says my implants were making me go crazy and I took them out and now I'm all happy. You're like, I don't think that's what was making you crazy. But in any event, all right. Well, I hope everybody got a lot of their questions answered about breast implants. Of course, if you have any other questions, concerns, come in. We will talk ad nauseum about this. Obviously, we love it. This is what we've chosen to do. And I think that in the right patient, the right implant can do wonders and really change their world and change their life. If you've got questions or topics you'd like for us to cover, visit ghsurgery.com and click on the Doc Dudes from the homepage. There's a link to click to submit your questions and ideas. Subscribe to the Doc Dudes so you'll never miss an episode. New episodes drop the last Tuesday of each month. You'll find us on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, really anywhere you listen to your favorite podcasts, as well as from our website. Follow us on Instagram and Facebook to find out when new episodes drop and other information about our practice. We appreciate you. And, tell your friends about us. This is a fun podcast about plastic surgery. What's not to love about this, right? Yeah. So until next time, this is the Doc Dudes. I am Dr. Garrett Harper, joined with
Evan Zug
and Robert Graper.
There you go. Thanks, guys. Bye.